Hello, everybody. Welcome to Brockton Writers Series for November 10th, 2021. Thank you all for being here. We'd wish to acknowledge that the Brockton organizers do our work on the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Huron-Wendat nations, and most recently the Mississaugas of the Credit River. We acknowledge the ways that colonization, genocide, and racism have impacted Indigenous peoples, and the settlers have a responsibility in making space at events like these for Indigenous voices. We all share the responsibility to critically understand and challenge forces of systemic oppression. And for many of us, this includes recognition of how our ancestors as settlers contributed to these colonial legacies with both silences and actions. It means we are obligated to write our elected officials and ask them to report back on the progress they've made with recommendations listed in the TRC and land back and missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and to listen to all of these voices and amplify them. We'd also like to acknowledge that Black Lives Matter, and we will continue to feature and center Black and Indigenous voices, other people of color, and other underrepresented groups in our series, and all of this is included in our mandate. Thank you very much to Ephemera Series for hosting us on their online platform. Our lineup is a guest speaker with a brief Q&A, and then our 4 readers, followed by group Q&A for them as well. Each presentation is a little shorter than we were in person, and we skipped the break. Please type your questions into the YouTube chat box as they occur to you. We will collect them to ask during the Q&A, and it's really helpful for us if you do type them as they occur to you, because there is a bit of a time delay. And now I'll turn it over to Emily.
Brockton Writers Series was founded in November 2009, which means we've been active in the Toronto literary scene for over a decade. Our Brockton Writers Series volunteers are Jen Albert, Hannah Amdemichael, Nancy K. Clark, Dorianne Emerton, Sonia Patare, and I'm Emily Sanford, and we have the pleasure of working together to keep Brockton Writers Series going. If you want to join the team, we welcome you. Check in with one of us after the readings. We'd love to hear from you. We would like to acknowledge with deep thanks the continued support of the Ontario Arts Council, who make this series possible. During these pandemic times, we're also indebted to our gracious host, Jen Albert of the Ephemera Series, and now of the Brockton Writers Series too. Check out the Ephemera events right here on this YouTube channel. Their next event is Wednesday, November 17th. Finally, our sincere thanks to you, our audience, for being here with us tonight. Now, on to Brockton's guest speaker. Deborah Dundas is the books editor at the Toronto Star. Deborah has a broad background in the media, including stints in business, lifestyle, and national and city politics, in television and newspapers, in Canada, and while working and living in Northern Ireland. She's reported and edited or produced on air and for print, and has interviewed some of the world's most recognizable authors, including Salman Rushdie, Margaret Atwood, Colson Whitehead, Jonathan Franzen, Zadie Smith, and John Irving. She regularly appears on stage, television, and radio, and is deeply involved with the literary community, often acting as a juror or host. She studied English and political science at Toronto's York University and is currently pursuing an MFA at the University of King's College. Deborah, welcome.
There we go. You know what? I unmuted and apparently I didn't click hard enough. Can everyone hear me now? Awesome. So I just was saying thank you very much for inviting me. It's so nice to be able to come and talk about our favorite subject, which is books. I find, over the past 2 years, we've been doing more and more of these virtual talks. And while there's nothing like being in person, one of the benefits, I think, is that we've managed to connect with people all over the world and the country in ways that we haven't been able to connect before. People can dial in and they can get into Zoom, or they can go on YouTube and watch. And I think being able to share thoughts across the country is something that I've found really great about the virtual talks, despite their drawbacks. The drawbacks, of course, being you can't gauge laughter, you can't gauge how you're doing. So a bit of 6 of one and half a dozen with the other. I think too that over the pandemic, we found that books, particularly print books, aren't dead, which is kind of good news for all of us, and something that was that was being talked about a lot. I think people were worried about the books industry. It's changed, certainly. It's going to continue changing, certainly. But the latest numbers, I think, are very encouraging. BookNet Canada, I don't know if you know them or not. They measure the books industry right across the country in so many different ways. They talk to readers, they talk to booksellers, they measure sales, and one of the latest measurements they did was looking at book sales for the first half of 2020 and how they looked over 2019 and the first half of 2021 and how they had improved over 2019 and 2020. So it gives us an idea over the past 3 years. Now, in 2019, book sales were going along pretty well. 2020, when the pandemic hit, they actually fell back. And then BookNet Canada measured in June and found that book sales are back and sort of booming. For the first half of 2021, there was a sale of 22,502,564 books in Canada. That was up 1.5 million books over the first half of 2020. That accounted for 463 million, more than $463 million in sales, which again was an increase of 47 million. So you think in Canada alone, it's $1 billion a year industry, which is something to be proud of, I think, and something to take some comfort from. It's steady, it's getting better, it's improving after some glitches, and we've all discovered that we love print again. So I think that's positive. I just want to say here too, check out BookNet Canada if you want information about the industry. Some of their stuff is for the industry only, for booksellers, and they subscribe, but anyone can go on to booknetcanada.ca, which is spelled exactly how it sounds, all one word, and find some, it's a fabulous resource, especially if you're a writer or a small publisher looking for trends and looking to see what people are buying and what people are reading. It's there. Now, I just sort of wanted to set that up a little bit, and and now I can talk about sort of what I do at the Star. I'm the books editor, and that means I get to choose the books that are highlighted at the Star, both on the website and in the print pages. I get hundreds of books every month. I get books from all of the big publishing houses. I get, both domestically and internationally. I get from small indie houses from across the country. I also get sort of in my email box, I get at least 100 emails every day in my inbox. So it's a lot of stuff to sort through. What that means ultimately is that a lot of books don't get mentioned and a lot of emails don't get answered. But so I always tell everybody, if I don't get back to you, it's nothing personal, sort of try again, because it'll flash in front of my eyes at some point. I have every week 1 to 2 dedicated book reviews pages. That fluctuates up and down. I think all of the paper has sort of shrunk a little bit in terms of size, in terms of what we get on the print pages. We can also, get a lot online. So you'll see a bit more there sort of throughout the week. but I have the 1 to 2 dedicated book review pages every week. And I'll do usually one big review. I've got the bestsellers lists, and I usually do a genre column. And then that leaves me the space either to do a roundup myself, or to do another review, or to get something else in that space. That means on the page, I have anywhere between 9 books sort of featured in some way, either with a small blurb or slightly bigger review, or a big review on that Saturday books page. I used to have 3 pages, and I can't even think of how I got it all done now. Trying to get all of those things in with more interviews and so on, but we do what we can. The other thing I do is with the bestsellers lists. I always try to pull out some book covers, which is another way of sort of giving authors and giving their books a little bit of attention on the page. So I'll always look for Canadian books. I'll try to make sure as much as I can, because I have to go by the bestsellers list. I try to sort of focus on different books every week, just so that every week, people's eyes are seeing another cover and another author, and is introduced that way. I think one of the mistakes sort of publishers make is they always want the big review, and I understand that can mean something for funding and all that kind of thing. I've only got sort of so much space, so I think trying to get a mention at least is what I can do. So if I know the book's there, if I know it's important, then I can focus on it. The other things I can do is I don't just have those specific pages. I can go throughout the entertainment section. So very often I'll have, a big article, or I'll have a big interview, and that'll be on other pages besides the book pages. There will be pieces that go throughout the week. Again, bigger articles. So, the books pages of themselves is only sort of one part of what we can do at the Star. I also can, shuffle, give things to other people within the paper. So we have, the Together section on Sunday, for example, and sometimes they'll pick a writer and ask various questions of the writer. Excuse me. So it's another way of getting your face in the paper and getting, the book title out there. There's the Insight section as well. They'll often do excerpts of big books and important books, and it's another way of, again, getting some space in the paper, and getting some space online and on the website. So there's that sort of variety of different ways, which means, I might have one page, that can get, up to 9 books a week, but there's actually quite a few books that we can focus on in sort of a whole variety of different ways. The way I pick books is, what I try and do is try and give as much of a flavor as I can of what's out there, whether it's making sure that I'm looking at trends and trying to pick, a couple of books that reflect the trends that are out there. That would sort of, it's like a big Venn diagram of, which different things are out there, and how many books I can pick that are going to touch on the various trends. So I'll look at trends. I will look at publishing houses. So, big publishing houses versus small publishing houses. I want to try and get a representation of all the different sorts of publishers that are across Canada and that are putting books out there. I think just with independent publishers, there's dozens of them across the country. So, they're not every book is going to get mentioned, and not every publishing house is going to be mentioned. I, again, try and pick up on some of the small ones, just so that we can get something out there, and do what I can. Let's see. So when people are sending me pitches, whether it's an author or a publisher, author pitches, I don't really like to get author pitches because authors are they're very focused on their own book, which is fair enough. Whereas a publicist, and even the small publishing houses are going to have a publicist, has a bit more expertise in what I'm looking for. So that endless stream of emails that are going by, they're more likely, to be able to catch my attention and make me stop. They know what I'm looking for. I'm looking for information about the book, certainly, and about the author, certainly, but also about the story that's around the book. So sometimes, just if there's a great author story, an inspiring author story, that can make it more compelling to get a freelance writer on it and say, hey, this is a really interesting story. Let's focus on this. Another thing that works is to pitch sort of a trend story. If you know that the book fits into something that's sort of going on in the world around us, whether it's newsworthy, that often helps, because sometimes we'll do that kind of trend story, and we can talk to a bunch of different authors or bring a bunch of different perspectives, which is good, and again is another way of getting your book mentioned, at least within the context of broader stories. The other thing too is, let us know about location. Now, we're the Toronto Star, so I try to focus on local stories, local authors very often, or at least balance it out with some of the broader national stories. And it's still the local newspaper for a lot of people. So let me know what the author's location is. One thing that's changed a little bit over the last little while is because we've gone so much more digital, we're looking at more sort of small writers that have a presence in some of the smaller centers across the country. We're not just the Toronto Star. We we'll do Halifax writers, Vancouver writers, and and because we're digital now, there's a push on that as well. I think we're in a spot at the moment where there's still a bit of a balancing act going on in terms of digital and print, and what works in print and what works digitally. So more of the sort of local writers are going to be sort of interest for a print audience, and more of the sort of national writers are going to be more effective digitally. So we're trying to balance the two. Does that make sense? I'm looking at Emily here. She's the face I'm looking at for to try and get some feedback, and she's nodding there. So it's a balance now, and we're sort of trying things here and there to see what kind of uptake audiences are getting. I hate to say it, but it's true. Big writers, big names are always going to get the big space, and I know they're always the ones who needs that publicity, right? But what they do is they get people buying the paper and interested in the paper, or subscribing online and digitally, and that's important too, because it keeps the book's pages there. One thing I do say is that there is a real dedication to books by the Star. I mean, I've been in this position for 6 years now. From the time I was 18, it was actually my dream job, which is sort of a bizarre dream job to have when you're 18, but there you go. And I was lucky enough to get it. So, it's nice to be able to, support the community, get out in the community, support as I can and where I can, and the Star pretty much backs me up on that. Again, it's a business, and so space is going to be limited, and it's going to go up and down depending on what's happening in terms of the industry and advertising and all the rest of it. But they are very supportive and continue to be supportive, and that allows me to cover as many books as possible. We still keep up the bestsellers lists, and we're adding to those and making them more robust, and that's always good. I know a lot of readers go straight to those to try to decide what they're going to read next. So, all of these little ways of getting into the paper, whether it's book jackets and bestsellers lists, or as part of a roundup, we do historical fiction, or we do crime fiction and horror and children's books. They all get at least the names mentioned a couple of times out there, and that's always a help. I think that's my 10 minutes up, isn't it? So probably a little bit longer. So I'm happy to take any questions. I think, here's one. Have you ever highlighted self-published authors or books? Do you know what? I try to, but as I said, from traditional publishers, whether they're small indie publishers even, they provide a vetting process. I can't read every single book that's out there. I can't assign somebody to read a book, self-published books, and say, find me a good one, and they have to go through 2,500 books. It's not viable for me to do that. Sometimes it'll be part of sometimes it will be part of a roundup or part of a different story where self-published authors will be part of the kind of trend story. But I just don't have the bandwidth to do that. Having said that, I think there's so much for self-published authors out there in terms of getting eyeballs on their books, that I think it's looking better than ever, with all of the different platforms that are out there. And I think that's something that self-published authors really have to go towards.
I have one more question for you. I'm seeing, I'll ask the question for you so you don't need to be navigating the chat too. So it says here, you mentioned trends in publishing and looking to feature books that pick up on the trends. Well, what sorts of themes are connecting with people right now in the late pandemic? What are you seeing trends in?
Oh my gosh, it's still a lot of sort of dystopian fiction. Dystopian fiction has just been so big. Sherry Dimeline is just out with her latest Hunting by Stars, and that's already doing well. Wob Rice is out with his follow-up, and they're doing really well. The other thing that's doing really well is climate books, whether they're fiction or nonfiction, anything to do with climate right now, and also sort of contemplative essay type books. I mean, people want to connect sort of philosophically. They want books that make them feel better, that they can apply to their own lives. I'm not talking about self-help books. I'm talking about more thoughtful essays. So, and don't ask me to name a title, because the second I'm asked to name that, all those hundreds of books on my shelf, they all rush into my brain at the same time. So I can add a couple though, at the end of the talk, when we put it online.
That's wonderful, and that's really interesting. I'm glad to hear that people are wanting to learn about what's going on around us, and readers are the best type.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I have another question here. Who do you get to do the review, the reviews, the staff or the other authors?
I try not to get other authors, or if I do get other authors, I don't really want them to know the authors they're writing about, because they can't be objective, right? So I've got reviewers who, some of them are just they're readers, they're readers with a pedigree of sorts. They've got degrees, they've got critical credentials, and they're the ones that I'll get to do the reviews. I do take pitches. I've got a pretty full stable of reviews right now, and again, very limited space, but I do take pitches sometimes. So, and I'm looking for new voices all the time. So it's always nice when I can get them. But it's yeah, it's not authors, it's more critics.
So I have another question. This is just my own question because I don't see another one coming in yet from the YouTube. Is there an ideal email that comes across your desk? Do you see a digital photo of the cover? You already see some blurbs. You see like what is the ideal email that you receive?
The ideal email has a good subject line that lets me know why I should open it, right? It's you know, give me, I think, the place name first, because I have to look at place, because, you know, we're Canadian and not every Canadian, you know, writer is going to get abroad. I mean, this is the place to nurture those writers. So I'll look at that. Give me the genre, give me what's exciting about it. You know, whether, you know, there was a bidding war on this debut author and why, you know, something, just a couple of words that'll get me. Give me the pub date. I want the pub date up high, because sometimes when I'm looking through and I'm doing a roundup myself, I'll do a roundup of sort of the latest books that are out that, you know, maybe haven't gotten a mention. And I'll look on my shelves and I'll look in my mailbox for some of the books that are out right now. And then what I can do is ask for a digital ARC if I don't have one on my shelf, and I can take a look at it and see whether I'm going to include it or not. And that's funny, even seasoned publicists don't always include the pub date. And so it's frustrating because I could be next November, right? I mean, I've literally got books on my shelf coming out in April. So, you know, it's easy to lose track, right? So it's that's very, very helpful. And I need them to be timely. I mean, I'm a newspaper, right? So I want them to be timely. I don't do like some of the magazines that you know have a longer timeline, or you know some of the journals that might do something from 6 months ago. I don't sort of have that luxury. It has to be sort of fairly, you know, on the mark.
Wow, that's interesting, and that's really good information. I see that there are probably some publicists in our audience scribbling mad notes and changing their templates.
That's right.
That's fantastic.
Please tell me the pub date. That's the just yeah.
I heard the location, the pub date, and an interesting blurb, and that's also fascinating too, because we all really love storytelling. Even those of us immersed in the business of storytelling,
right.
love a good story. Tell me a bit about this author and where they're from.
Absolutely, yeah. and why the book's important. You know, it's because you know it's every every pitch I get is beautifully written. Well, I hope so. I mean, you know, that's the business we're in. So, you know, yeah, I needed something a bit more than that up top, just because, yeah, there's so much out there, and it allows me again to say, okay, well, if I'm going to sample and try and give sort of an impressionistic picture of what's you know as a snapshot of what's going on, I like to have a little bit of everything.
Thanks so much, Deborah. This is fantastic. This is all really valuable information and really exciting stuff for those of us who are putting out books anytime soon or hoping to. It's really, really good information. So thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure. You know, feel free to drop me a note and I'll do what I can to answer.
Wonderful. Sure, I'll put the location right at the top.
That's right.
Thanks so much, Deborah.
Thank you.
So usually at this point, we would hand around a pitcher for pay what you can donations to help support Brockton and our writers. But passing a pitcher in a pandemic, that doesn't fly. So we've set up a PayPal account. So you can please go to paypal.me/Brockton Writers, and we'll put that in the chat. If you're able to spare a few dollars for our brilliant writers, we would love for you to do so. We also value your opinion a lot, so we'd love for you to take our survey and suggest topics for future guest speakers, amongst other things. So please take our very brief BWS survey and let us know your thoughts, and we'll also post that link in the chat. And now, for our readers. Again, just a reminder, type your questions in the chat as they occur to you, and then we'll collate them together, and all of our readers will come back at the end to answer your questions as a group. Although you can direct questions to a specific writer or ask one question for all of them, up to you. So first up, we have Lisa Richter, a Toronto-based poet. Ooh, the location's right at the top there. Lisa Richter is a Toronto-based poet, writer, teacher, and editor. She is the author of 2 books of poetry, Closer to Where We Began from Tightrope Books, and Nautilus and Bone from Frontenac House, whose honors include the Canadian Jewish Literary Award for Poetry, the National Jewish Book Award for Poetry, and Book Publishers Association of Alberta's Robert Croce Award. Her poetry and creative nonfiction have appeared in numerous journals and anthologies, including The Grain, the Literary Review of Canada, The New Quarterly, and Exile Quarterly. She can be found online at www.lisarichter.org. We'll put that in the chat as well. It's Richter with a CH. Lisa, take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm just thrilled to be here at the Brockton Writers Series. Thank you so much for having me. It's just a pleasure. Just hang on 2 seconds while I sort out my whole view thing. Reading on YouTube, reading online, this is nonstop adventures. So I'm going to read a few poems from my collection, Nautilus and Bone, tonight. I'm also going to read a couple of newer pieces. The collection revolves around the life and work of Anna Margolin, who was a Yiddish language poet from the early 20th century, who immigrated to New York from Russia in 1906. And I felt very drawn to her work, as well as to her whole story, as well as her unconventional, rebellious, radical, very unorthodox lifestyle and the life that she led. And so many of the poems in this collection are told in her voice. The first poem that I'm going to read is in conversation with one of Anna Margolin's poems, Primeval Murderous Night. The poem itself is entitled The Primeval Murderess Talks Back to the Poet, and it starts with 2 epigraphs, 2 quotes. One from the anarchist Emma Goldman, "If I can't dance, I don't want to be part of your revolution." And the second quote, "I just took a DNA test. Turns out I'm 100% that bitch. Lizzo." Truth hurts. Not a dram of blood have these hands spilled. To you, I read primeval, from the Latin primivus, early in life, youthful. Would a murderess weave her hair into a coronet of foxglove? Carouse away the night in the city's armored paunch until her shoes crumble? Grope in the dark for her sister's hands? I've been known to worship a mother I wasn't born to, but would come to love as my own, not out of desire to commune with alpine blossom or tinder wolf, but the necessity of loosening the slip knot pressing my throat. Lady, I don't need your help, the cracked pedestal where in your earnest rage you've mounted me. Spare me your drink of tears, your bread of shame. Do not beg me to seduce, devour, bewitch, and mesh. I've no time for such meshuggahs. If you want him, no more greed-crazed gulps from promised streams. Why ensnare when you can entrance? Why pummel and thrash? Invite him to meet you in the ring, only your vanquished pride to swallow. If at a midnight you rise, glazed with a somnambulist's grace, take him to my secluded forest, to the star-drowned beach, where the ocean's a hound baying to storied gods, restless as thieves. Surround him, waltz him in circles into the unfurling sea, minding stones that threaten to ribbon your feet. Sirens whose swan songs will singe you to death. The next poem is called As She Wandered, She Found Her Sea Legs. It's in a poetic form called the glossa, which starts with a quatrain, 4 lines of another poem. And then each of the subsequent stanzas ends with one of those lines. So it's a way of paying tribute to another poet, having their lines woven and collaged sort of through your own. The lines at the beginning of this poem are from Anna Margolin, translated from the Yiddish by Shirley Kumoff. I've wandered so much, beloved, through strange and dark lives, through hearts like wastelands. Be kind. Anna Margolin. All day, the merciless rain, evaporating off pavement. Do you want me as a man, a woman, a fawn, a minotaur? I'm the wild boar prodding the soil with its grubby tusks. Chains of wildflowers chafe my wrists. In our bed, the sea is a sand dune, a field of Elysian waves. I enter you, part your bearded thighs. Could your face be more flushed? Nobody touches me, no bruises on my apples. I hang my grief out to dry on the line. I have wandered so much, beloved, that stillness brings the wildest vertigo. The ocean swallows us whole. Today, another sweatshop burns. Locked in, the workers pound the doors until they don't. Are my poems the blood I let from my wounds, or the wounds themselves? By night, the stars divest me of pretense. In the bathhouse, our naked tongues unfurl Yiddish, German, Italian. Outside the Essex Street Market, dogs and young boys grapple for scraps. No pockmarks on the moon, but a lexicon of scars. I see you weaving in and out, my love, through strange and dark lives, through the countenance of kings sipping hemlock wine. No longer able to distinguish beggars from beguilers, I dream of horses stampeding under my skin, the apex of earthly bulbs, irrevocable as caves. Uptown rose gardens, villages of petals and drowsing scent. When I awake, my engorged throat rasps, a scourge of winter. Montparnasse, Montmartre, I slug memories straight from the bottle. Pigeon on my windowsill, orange jewel of its eye hooking into mine. I've done more than my share of paddling through hearts like wastelands. Fractured silence solicits migration. Some mistake me for a destitute baroness, others a polyglot whore. Every poem I write is a crone's epitaph. Rooted angel, I follow you into subterranean castles. Where are the sirens, the nymphs preening for imminent tempests? New York expands and contracts with my bewildered lungs. Velvet evenings in June, darkness anoints my hair with ink. I tuck myself not into bed, but into sleep, where blue is the color of shadows admonishing, be kind. And I'm going to close with a new poem called The Invention of Memory. And while I may look like a prophecy monger, we shall confine our attention to the clump of houses in a seaport subdivision, home to Lancelotti, the Italian abbot, a respectable and voracious man, save for the tentacle suckers big as saucer lids. Absolutely, I am governed by sunbeams. When death comes to dock, the living fall under the spell of its sail. If a shadow spills over a milk crate, your secrets will unravel like yarn at your feet. All night I dream that Jane kisses my hands. Each kiss is barely equal to a single speck of sleep. On the search for El Dorado, a pilot and her son's ghost discover the lost origins of birds. Not dinosaurs, but sheep and iron bones. A princess living under the curse of a wicked troubadour awakens every morning to a puzzle presented by Mephisto. She cannot discern scarves from cabbages, foxes from scarecrows. In a past life, I was a rainstorm that abandoned the premise of cleansing, a locket in the shape of atonement. You were a pinch, a puncture, a compulsion. Let us assume nobody knows the superstructures of clouds forged in the absence of breath. Poetry is a street in Jakarta, overrun by soundless footsteps at midnight. Ask me again how the moon invents memory. If a shy, wild animal thwarts all attempts at taming, dip a magpie's wing in a bath of fermented tears. Allow the beast to memorize your scent. In an open drawer, a gun twists into a question with no answer but blood. Thank you so much for listening. Have a great night.
Thanks so much, Lisa. That was beautiful. I love that you treated us with a new poem as well. That's not in your recent book. Congratulations, by the way. Next up, we have Kelly Robson, who is a Canadian short fiction writer. She was awarded the 2018 Nebula Award for Best Novelette in both the 2019 and 2016 Aurora Awards for Best Short Story. She's also been the finalist for the Hugo, Nebula, World Fantasy, Theodore Sturgeon, Locus, Astounding, Aurora, and Sunburst Awards. Welcome, Kelly.
Hi, it's really nice to be here. Thanks for having me. I am coming to you from Spain. Here I am in Madrid, where it is 1:15 in the morning. So I have to apologize. I'm not going to stick around for the Q&A. If you have any answers that you need from me, please just email me. My email is on my website. I'm going to read to you tonight from High Times in the Low Parliament, which is coming out from Tor.com Publishing next August. It is it is a lesbian stoner buddy comedy with fairies about Brexit. And it turns out that when times are dark, I write light. So this is what I wrote last year during the beginning of the pandemic. We're going to go through the first chapter. Chapter 1. Lana Baker was the finest scribe in Aldgate, but it won her little praise. Certainly none from her mothers or sisters, who would have preferred another strong hand at the ovens. Skilled as she was with pen and paper, Lana was excused from keeping the books for their busy East London bakery. Though she might pencil numbers straight and square, she was a dunce at sums. Always had been. She took great care never to improve. When forced, Lana wrote her mother's letters, ran errands for her 3 sisters in exchange for favors, pushed a broom when she couldn't avoid it, stayed out late, slept later, and thoroughly enjoyed her role as family despair. Many, if not most afternoons, Lana could be found at the Twin Pumps, holding shop with a cup of ale at her elbow. If you wanted a pretty letter, it cost you a penny a page, but for a promise, a favor, or a compliment, Lana might be persuaded to pick up her pen and write you a note. She wouldn't write curses, not for any money, but she'd put your name on a scrap for free, always happy to show off her collection of pens and inks, especially if the girl was pretty. The girl who sat across from her one fine spring morning was very pretty, but she'd had some hard luck. A livid bruise bloomed across her jaw and nose, and her right hand was bandaged into a stump at the end of her soft, plump arm. I wish I could pen the response myself, Cora said, but I never learned ambihand, and if a scribe can't write her own letter, oughtn't she have one truly skilled do it? Lana reached for the letter Cora had placed on the table. May I? She asked with a flirtatious dip of her chin. Cora set down her cup of wine and leaned close, making the most of her big brown eyes. Did she flutter her lashes? Must be some trick of the light, for who could flirt the day after breaking a hand and bashing her face in? But then, perhaps it was a swindle, the bruise a beetroot stain. No matter. As long as Lana wasn't the mark, it was no business of hers. This is nice paper, Lana said, enjoying the texture of the thick, smooth sheet between her fingers. Lana released the crisp folds and scanned the letter, a fairy summons in an ornate uncial script, inked by a skilled hand and, as with everything fairies touched, scattered with glittering scales that clung to everything. The wording was officious, with a short deadline for reply and too many official stamps to count. Cora sighed. It's an honor to be summoned to the low parliament. I do so wish I could go. Her eyes reddened. She looked about to cry. But it'll be months before I can hold a pen again. Swindle or no swindle, Cora was pretty and a fellow scribe. So to Lana, that only meant one thing, the opportunity to show off. She flipped open the lid of her writing kit, selected a piece of her finest paper, and lined it with a few light passes of charcoal along her ruler. She dipped her favorite pen in a noggin of ultramarine ink. Lana had a connoisseur's taste for admiration, but Cora laid it on a bit thick, leaning over the table and making admiring noises over every stroke of the pen. Lana could hardly fault her. She was awfully handsome after all. But when Lana had finished the letter, stamped the corner with her mark, folded it close into a tight package, and addressed it with a flourish, that's when the price came. Would you run along to Ludgate for me? Cora laid her good hand on Lana's wrist and leaned close, as a favor one scribe to another. Well now, Lana said, I might be persuaded. I'll make it worth your time. Cora slid around to Lana's side and slipped her fingers feather-light up Lana's thigh. A lengthy negotiation followed, flavored with wine and cushioned with lips soft as promises. Heat rose on Lana's cheeks, neck, breast, and elsewhere. One of the reasons she didn't hold shop at the Twin Pumps more often was that the benches were too narrow and hard, but suddenly she was prepared to sit there till doomsday if possible, kissing Cora. Then a wet rag hit her in the side of the head. Go outside or take her upstairs, the landlady said. Nobody buys pies while you're turning their stomachs. Cora pulled away. She grazed her lips across Lana's cheek and nibbled her earlobe. Take it to Ludgate, yes? She whispered. She didn't wait for an answer. When Lana opened her eyes, the hem of Cora's short skirt was just disappearing out the door. Kisses will be your downfall, the landlady said. Never, Lana laughed. She capped her ink and squared away her kit. Kisses are life. And death, too, said the landlady. Only such as you think it's a fair way to go. A stroll through East London on a warm evening, what could be better? The city burbled with activity, as if setting out wares for Lana's inspection. She could stop at the inkers, test the newest formulas, or she could nip into a pen maker's and ogle gracefully turned shanks and shiny nibs, and then pop next door to the paper makers and get treated like a hero for the price of one full sheet. The city was hers, and she was the city's, the finest scribe, her mother's happiest and most despaired of daughter, benevolent and undemanding surveyor of all. At the bakery on Wood Street, Lana bought a cream bun. The sun dipped low as she slowly strolled towards Ludgate, its amber light glancing across the chimney stacks. Children hid from their mothers. Sweethearts clutched each other in doorways, and Lana bit into her snack. The baker was generous with her cream, far more than Lana's mother, and the bun left a dab on her nose. If only she had a friend nearby who would offer to lick it off, but no. She flicked it with her forefinger and dropped the drip on her tongue. Maybe tomorrow, Cora would offer more thanks for favors rendered. Or her childhood friend Felicia might decide to cross the street and claim some kisses. Or if the burly brewer's assistant newly hired at the Twin Pumps hadn't already found an admirer for her broad shoulders and thick wrists, Lana might console her for an evening. She pondered these happy thoughts along the way to Ludgate, coattails flapping in the breeze. High atop the watchtower that bordered Newgate and New Change sat a pink fairy, small as a toddler and half as wide, if you didn't count her peony-colored butterfly wings. She had elbows on her knees and her chin in her hands. "Good evening, beauty," Lana caroled. She swung her fingertips to her eyebrow in a sloppy salute. The fairy returned the gesture, not in kind, not even in spirit. 2 fingers shaped into horns, hooking in the rudest of gestures. It was only to be expected. Fairies were nasty. A girl could go begging for a kind word. "And a good night to you too, beauty," Lana sang as she passed. On the crest of the hill, a great bloom of sunset illuminated London's Fairy Palace, a famous sight, commemorated in the window of every second print shop, its crystal arches and towers made only more stunning by contrast with the coal field it sat upon. 250 years hadn't cleaned the evidence of conflagration from the ground below. The rest of the city might be renewed 6 or 8 times since the Great Fire of 1666, charred beams and blackened foundations long since cleared away or built over. But at Ludgate, the ground hadn't changed. Neither had the fairies that lived there. They remained as sour as ever. Lana climbed up to the palace's rose quartz eastern door. No knocker to bang on, no porter to inquire of. She stood tall and lifted Cora's letter. "I have a missive. Who will take it from me?" A spy hole grated open, a tiny face poked through. Delicately etched features, arching brows, narrow eyes of topaz and skin of watered silk, and teeth, sharp, bared. "Damn you, Legger," the fairy said. "Should we all come running when you call? Who's it for?" "Let's see." Lana tipped the letter and read the direction. "Most bounteous beauty Masterwort, Director Legate of the Low Parliament Delegation from England." Lana shrugged. Fairies liked their titles, but it was nothing to her. "Director Masterwort is resident in London, I believe. May I leave the letter with you, beauty?" "Cool your heels, waster." Lana flipped the tails of her coat and took a seat. The palace steps offered a view over the chimneys and water towers down to the river, where masts danced in a gentle tidal swell. A tidy view, not one misrepaired or unsightly building. The fairies wouldn't stand for it. No tanneries or fishworks across the river there, just the vast bankside farms that grew flowers for the palace. When the crystal door finally opened, a fairy with fuzzy apricot-furred wings flew out to hover at the top of the stairs. Her mouth was screwed up as if ready to vomit. "I'm Masterwort. Give me the bloody damned letter," she said, her voice a high, crisp burr like insect wings. Masterwort, Lana offered the letter with a grin and a bow. It would be wrong to say that she loved a challenge, for she certainly didn't. But she liked to keep genial while others brewed storm clouds, and she'd had a lot of practice. Masterwort ripped the letter open. She sighed as she read it, then groaned and beat the heel of her fist into her forehead. Her wings shed golden glitter. The breeze picked it up and blew the scales onto the coalfield, gilding the ashes. "Damn it!" the fairy yelled. "Damn you! Damn everyone!" I'll stop there. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for listening.
That was amazing. Thank you so much. I loved how it was like a little bit cheeky, you know? I like that sort of thing. Next up, we have Marylee Dickinson, a Toronto writer. Once again, location at the top. Marylee Dickinson, a Toronto writer, grew up in northern Quebec. Her first book, One Day It Happened, was published at the age of 70. 4 more books since include short stories, 2 novels, and a mystery. She has also completed a memoir and a self-help book on retirement issues. Check her website for more information. Marylee, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm very happy to be at the Brockton Writers Series. Thanks to the organizers for creating such an interesting evening and for including me again. Virtual allows people I know from distance to attend as well, and I'm hoping some of them are here. And I'm always delighted to meet and hear my fellow authors, although I wish that was in person. Thank you, Kelly and Lisa, and I'm looking forward to Jael's reading. I had a really difficult time deciding what to read. Usually I would choose something from my latest books, in this case, a mystery, The White Ribbon Man, published by Lana, or Dance Season, a collection of linked short stories. The first you can get through Nana or libraries. The second is available on Amazon, so you can get a copy there, ebook or print. I had the temerity to do one of mine self-published. However, what I'm going to read tonight is a story about a feisty old woman that hasn't yet been published and is possibly still in progress. I wish I could read it all to you, but it's just a tad too long. So here are the first pages of Watch Out for the Old Lady. It used to be, oh my gosh, it disappeared. It used to be the blank page. Now it is the screen. I leave the computer to eat some roasted mushrooms and red pepper on focaccia for my lunch. I'm hungry, but the truth is I'm stuck. I put my plate and cutlery into the sink and head down to Bloor Street. I'm stymied by the challenges of writing another mystery. I don't know where to start, or even if I want to. If I walk for a while, something may emerge. As I start to cross the bicycle and traffic lanes, I'm suddenly surrounded by a wall of young boys in tattered blue jeans, hanging almost below their butts. Watch out for the old lady, one of the boys shouts. They encircle me, and for a moment, I'm one of them. No, they're talking about me, an alien, an old lady. It takes a lot of years to get to where I am, that is true. These boys, these scoundrels are half my age. Oh, no, more than that. They might be 1/4 years old or even 1/5. Children, mere children. Their lives are ahead of them. Their world is alien to me. Or perhaps I really am the alien. I have almost no eyelashes anymore. It would embarrass me to tell where else hair has disappeared. No one warned me of these indignities of aging. Am I wiser? Are there any benefits to all of this? When my mother was old, I wished I could learn about navigating the waters of aging from her. Maybe Mom didn't know, as instead of sharing her knowledge, she relied on me. Tell me, I nonetheless thought. The boys danced around me, reaching toward the strap of my shoulder purse. Why in the world did I bring the red one? I hang on to it tightly, even though I know if they tug hard enough, I'm supposed to let go. My mother would likely have done so, but my grandmother would not. She would have hung on. She would have shouted at the boys. I don't think that would have been so smart, but Nan aged well, remaining the holy terror she had always been. I scowl at my tormentors. In a mystery, these wretched, annoying boys would get arrested. For some reason unclear to me, they suddenly turn almost in unison and run. I look over my shoulder and see a policeman in full uniform with a red stripe down his pant leg approach. You all right? He asks as he crosses the street. I nod and he turns away and gestures for cars to move through the intersection. As I reach the curb, I spot a friend I've not seen since the launch of an earlier book. A few months after the book launch, which Harry and his wife attended, I began to wonder why he hadn't responded to an email. The description of a mole on the lower back of one character in that novel is the only clue that might explain it. Only Nicole would question how I knew about the mole, because it is hidden away where no one would see it unless Harry had removed his, well, you know. And I can only guess at the fallout. Harry's wife's questions, her comments, perhaps demands that he cut off all contact with me, even though what happened between Harry and me long predated this meeting they call. People ask about different characters, of course. Is that one you? Is that one him? It's hard to explain that none of the characters is anyone in particular. Another friend thought that character was a politician I knew who treated me in rather shoddy fashion, and that I disguised that tall white man with big ears by making him black. But I didn't even think of that man when I created my character. No, it wasn't that politician. It wasn't any politician. No confession forthcoming. The character is himself. He doesn't resemble anyone. But that isn't true either. He does resemble Harry in some ways. Harry, who in spite of our few months of emotional and physical turbulence, a love affair that stopped almost as soon as it started, became a friend. And he and Nicole, both my friends by the time the book was published, gave me a mauve silk scarf they brought back from Florence that year. Seems as if that friendship is over. When the man draws closer, I am disappointed. He isn't Harry. Where can I go to escape all this garbage that swirls around in my head? The usual, I suppose. I pick up a coffee at a nearby Tim Hortons and then walk slowly back to my apartment. I think of Rosemary, the main character in my first mystery. I wrote her as somewhat naive because I'm not like that, although I do miss the sense of wonder that goes with the world opening up for me. But my concern now is how much more chaos Rosemary might be able to tolerate, although I know she enjoyed her role in the first mystery. At the mailbox, I encounter my neighbor, Thelma, who is moving out this month. I greet her and ask her how she's coping with the move. How do you manage to relax in the midst of it? I'm a Christian, Thelma says. I start the day by reading the Bible. Oh, yeah, I know that. She's told me before. Little white-haired woman with an accent from somewhere. She told me where when I first met her, but now I don't know if it was England or maybe she's an Aussie. But that isn't what I was asking. I want to holler. Does she have to change everything into an attempt at conversion? I ignore both what she said and how I feel about it. I wondered how you relax. I'm trying to figure out how to cut back on the busyness of my life. Taking up Christianity isn't what I have in mind. Well, she says, reading good books. She starts to tell me what she is reading now in addition to the Bible. A couple of good autobiographies, a memoir, a travelogue on France. Oh yes, I say, I'll have to slow down and start to read more again. I have a pile of unread books on the floor under the sofa. I never seem to have time, but I will start to find it. I'm a little old white-haired woman too, and I wonder why this one riles me so much. Maybe it emanates from all the pressure I had on me as a child to go to church and to one of the same denomination as this woman's. Even so, I suppose I will miss her quiet. Aside from the occasional soft barking of her tiny dog, I never hear her next door. And the truth is, we've had some engrossing conversations. Often they are based on the church and her questions on which one I go to, somewhat concerned when she learned that I did not attend any of them. She must have made the assumption I did after she read my book in which a church is the setting for a murder. Not only that, an Anglican church. That church is where Jack Coster emerged as a detective and the love interest of Rosemary. Maybe Detective Sergeant Coster could turn out to be the detective again if I could only think of a story where he might fit. Although I have contemplated introducing a female detective in the role he had in the previous mystery. Rosemary would likely want to deal with the same detective, but would support introducing the female instead if the cop held authentic feminist views. I'm very happy with my life, my neighbor informs me now, just before I slip my key into my apartment's lock. Content, she continues. Glad to hear it, I say, tempted to add that I am too, in case she thinks she is scoring a point. And does she protest too much? By the time I figured out what to say, she has gone down the hall toward the elevator, the little perky-eared tawny dog tripping on ahead of her. I push open my door. As always, I immediately feel calm when I see the leaves on the trees through my living room window. I'm surprised to find I'm going to miss Selma when she moves away. No one wants a quiet, respectful neighbor to leave. There's no telling who will show up in their place. I might make her into a character in a mystery that still eludes me, that doesn't yet have any content or shape. Will I invent a murder in the condo building? Is the character I construct a woman with some of Thelma's idiosyncrasies? She would likely irritate Rosemary, but that ought not to be a reason to exclude her as a character. And she would not try to convince Rosemary to go to church, as Rosemary already does that. Oh, it's all getting too convoluted even for me, so I drop it and head for the refrigerator and a cool glass of lemonade. Any plot lines that occur aren't necessarily going to develop, and this is likely one of those you can take it or leave it possibilities. The neighbor with her Bible, a swarm of boys in the street, the mole on Harry's lower back. Memory blurs all of this into an enormous swirling mass at times. Unlike when I was younger, I don't feel as if I have to sort it out. I could go down to the lake and take the ferry over to the island and think about something else. Maybe the woman I met there a couple of summers ago who spends 4 or so months every winter in Nepal and India. She does some kind of therapy with tuning forks. Maybe I'll go for treatment. That day on the island, we talk about her adventures in my books. She bought the one in which the son of the woman's husband turns up after his father dies. The next time I saw the woman, again on the island, she told me her own history. If I'd known you before you wrote the book, I would have assumed you were writing about me. I shrugged. Of course you would. As I contemplate her presence in this new book, I regret that I don't see a role for her, although the tuning forks might be useful. They feel like something that could be mine somehow, and they could then be used in the title, The Mystery of the Tuning Forks. Before I commit to something like that, I would have to figure out if they have an important enough role in the story. Trying to deal with all of this is tiring. And of course, Thelma will also likely assume I'm writing about her. Maybe I am. After a while, I never know, or I forget. Anyway, does it hurt anyone? It might hurt me when people like Harry won't speak to me anymore. There are likely a lot of unintended consequences in life and a lot of damage that one little old lady with white hair can do. There's more, but I'll stop there and thanks so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Marylee. That was great. I was really kind of rooting for Thelma to be in the book. You know, maybe as the victim, maybe as someone who solves the murder or helps or an accessory to the crime or something. But yeah, it was very entertaining. So next we have Jael Richardson, who is the author of The Stone Thrower, a book columnist on CBC's Q, and the founder and executive director of the Festival of Literary Diversity, or the Fold, as we know it, in Brampton, Ontario. Her debut novel, Gutter Child, was shortlisted for the Amazon First Novel Award. She holds an MFA in creative writing from the University of Guelph and lives in Brampton, Ontario. Welcome, Jael. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thanks everyone for tuning in. I normally read the opening chapter, but I submitted that for the blog. So hopefully you all read it on the blog and you're well prepared. So I won't read that section, which I normally read. So I'm a little bit like, this is a section I don't normally read, but I'm excited to read it. It's chapter 6. It's Elamina's first meeting with a really important person. I'll just explain a bit of backstory so you're not totally lost if you didn't read the blog or haven't seen the book. So Elamina is the main character in the story. She has arrived at Livingstone Academy. She's 14 years old. She was born in a place called the Gutter and was removed from the gutter as a baby and raised by a woman on the mainland, a mainlander. And we know that mainlanders are of a fairer complexion, and Sosi people, who are the people in the gutter, are of a darker complexion. And so the other thing that we know in this story is that folks from the gutter have a scar on their hand. Most people have 2 scars. Elamina has 1. So she's been trying to figure out what that means and how all of that shapes who she is. And so this is her first, and you'll hear in the section, she mentions it. This is her first meeting with a gutter woman, an older woman who was raised in the gutter, who is part of what's known as the gutter system. And so they're going to have this really important conversation a few weeks after she's been at Livingstone Academy. Another thing important to note is Elamina arrives at Livingstone Academy bald. Her mother used to shave her hair, and so it started to grow out. And that's why she's been sent to see Ida Mason. The basement of the main house is gritty and cold with concrete floors, stone walls, and pipes that hover low. At the end of a long hallway, past the rumble and heat of the laundry facilities and the clanging of the maintenance department, I find Ida Mason's living quarters and a studio that looks like a small version of the salons mother went to in Cape Town. A black leather chair with a metal base is bolted to the floor in front of a mirror surrounded in lights. And there's a small sink in the corner with a long counter covered in bottles. When I enter the room, a full-bodied woman in a gray dress appears from around the back corner, sweeping bits of hair into a pile. She has a white apron tied around her waist and a colorful scarf wrapped around her head like a crown. Miss Mason? The woman stands tall and graceful, and part of me wants to bow, but I just hang my head low and pass her the note, scratching at my skull. My hair has grown quickly since arriving at Livingstone, but I have no idea what to do with it. Yesterday, I started pulling at the knots with a comb, hoping it would help, but I only made things worse. When I showed up at the office, Violet laughed into her hand, and Miss Templeton sent me down to the basement right away with a note. Ida, fix this. Ida reads the note and shakes her head, tossing it in a garbage bin and opening her arms wide. Baby girl, I'm glad you finally made your way down to see me. I was wondering when you'd come. I step into her slowly, and she hugs me so tight, I feel swallowed in warmth. I wrap my arms around her and squeeze back, hoping she doesn't let go. You're okay. You're safe here, she says. And I sob into her shoulder, leaving dark stains on her chest. I'm sorry, Miss Mason, I say when I lift up my head, wiping my tears away with the back of my wrist. Don't be sorry, baby girl, she says, pulling me in again to show that it's really okay. And it's Ida in here, just Ida when you talk to me. I step back and she hands me a handkerchief. Well, this coat is fancy, she says, sliding her hands down the sleeves with a strange look on her face. And I don't know whether to feel proud or ashamed. I should mention that Elamina's been named a red coat, so she wears this special coat. But I don't know what to say. It'll help, that's for sure, she says, shrugging her shoulders. You take your help where you can get it, baby girl. I know how that goes. But you don't need all that in here, so you can hang that coat right outside the door when you come in from now on. I nod, hanging up the coat just like she asked and settling into the chair. Never combed your own hair, have you? Ida says, touching my hair as her mouth bunches like a prune. No, ma'am, I say, trying to look anywhere but the mirror. When I was younger, I used to stare at myself for hours. I'd study my face and the strangeness of it in comparison with the faces I saw at the park and on the covers of mother's magazines. I would gaze at every feature and I would ask myself the same questions, tilting my head this way and that to see it at different angles. Am I pretty? Am I kind of pretty or really pretty or almost pretty? How about now? When mother asked what I was doing in the bathroom and why I was taking so long, I would tell her I was studying. And it was true. I was studying how I looked, creating a list of things I liked, things that made me happy or proud, like the round of my head and the shape of my eyes. I liked the way I smiled and the way my top lip slipped over my gum like my smile was too big to hold inside. But eventually I saw uneven teeth, an oversized grin, and a head that was bald like a boy's. I longed for hair like mother's, with skin just as fair and scar-free. I started to wash my face and brush my teeth with the lights off or with my eyes closed, like my own face was something no one else should have to see, including me. You never had a gutter woman do your hair, Ida says, and I shake my head. Weren't there any gutter women in that town where you were raised? I watched Ida standing behind me, hands on my shoulders, waiting for me to respond. Miss Ida, you're the first gutter woman I've ever met. First one I've ever spoken to, far as I can remember. Ida closes her eyes and shakes her head before clearing her throat. Now then, You're going to have to tell me what it was like being out there with all them mainlanders instead, she says. I shrug. It was different. Well, I figured that much, baby girl. But when you've lived something no one else has, you have to tell folks what it's like as though they can't see, and they're asking you what red looks like. When someone asks you for a picture, you got to spell it out in color for them, she says. I try to think of how to explain Cape Town, but I can't find the words. How long have you been here? I say. Left the gutter when I was 5 years old for the academy track. Spent 10 years at North End Academy, which is a place I don't care to remember, that's for sure. I worked down the way for a bit until Mr. Gregors hired me. Been working for 20 years, maybe, so 30 years on the mainland is my guess, though I'm sure my debt manager could count it better. 30 years. Sounds like a whole lot, I know, but the truth is it doesn't feel that long at all. Besides, I got it really good here, she says, with a toothy smile that's full of gaps and one tooth that's mostly brown. How much longer till you're done? Till you get redemption freedom, I say. She takes a comb and pulls it through my hair, and when a piece of the comb breaks off, she grabs another from the pile and tries again. I'll be done in 20 or so, I think. But the truth is, I'll probably work as long as I can. Maybe I'll buy a house in the city and come in with the mainland decos, she says. But I got to keep going. Why? I got family who are counting on me. I was the one that got out to make the way. When I get redemption freedom for myself, I get to give it to one other person. I figure I can get one of my grandnieces out, hopefully one with a baby. That way I can get 2 generations out at the same time, set our family up right for the future. But there's still others. There's always others. Don't think I could enjoy my own life knowing they're still in the gutter, that I didn't do everything in my power to help, she says. In Cape Town, you aren't allowed to work until you're 18. And even then it's optional, I say. Mainlanders can't start until 18. It's the law. It's the law that you can't work, she says. And when I nod, she shakes her head, like the unfairness of it all is too much. I tell her about the kids being kids legislation and the youth enjoyment opportunities, how mainland kids are encouraged to explore, and how mother used to take me to Cape Town museums, but only during the day when other kids were at school, where they'd let us in at twice the price. Ida shakes her head again, her jaw stiff with anger. I feel a sharp pain in my scalp as she pulls the plastic comb through my hair a little harder. Do you miss your family? I say through gritted teeth, and Ida nods. Most days I miss them fine, just in passing. But some days I'll admit it's hard. Knowing they're there and I'm here, that the little ones don't know anything about me, except what I write down in letters. But I try not to worry about that because nothing good comes from it. All worrying can do is bring a sickness that starts deep inside. And I got no time to be sick, baby girl. I got to stay well up here most of all, she says, tapping her finger against the side of her head. Besides, I'd rather be here making a way than waiting in the gutter. Can't complain about that. But there's a lot she could complain about. And I think about telling her that it's another way mainland life is different. Mainlanders get to be up in arms angry when things don't go their way. And when they complain loud enough, the mainland government usually does something about it. The year before I was supposed to attend Cape Town Elementary, the school board established tests to ensure that all students were on track and making good progress. The Mothers Alliance made signs and yelled outside the board office and in the lobby at City Hall. They said standardized tests were the equivalent of work and should be against the law. And the tests were banned, just like they wanted. 1 year later, those same people grabbed new signs and stood in front of Cape Town Elementary to protest my enrollment in a school that had always been exclusively for mainlanders, in a town that prided itself on the same. Keep the mainland for mainlanders, they said. And when mother dragged me out, never to return, they got their way again. I asked Ida if there's a way to change things for her or for her family, but she shakes her head. It doesn't work that way for us, she says. She sprays my hair with water, picking at the tips with a few sharp tugs, and I try not to let her see how much it hurts. I wondered about you project cases, how you would do out there with no one, Ida says, scowling at my hair before starting again. I only got 5 years in the gutter with my family, but those 5 years mean everything to me, especially now that I've been gone for so long. I can't imagine what it was like to have no one, to know nothing. I tell her about a photograph of a gutter family I saw in a library book before I could read. how I ripped the picture out and studied those faces carefully for signs that we were related. I'd never seen faces like mine before, and I decided they were my long-lost family. I gave them all names, and I held that photo inside one of my books until it was so thin and warm and worn it fell apart in my fingers. Is that all you know about your own, that picture? Ida says, with her eyebrows pushed down toward her nose. Mr. Gregor's told me things, and Mother taught me history for school, I say. Don't believe everything them mainlanders tell you, she says, shaking her head like I'm making her tired and sad. And don't believe what you read in those books either. She stops working and takes a long, deep breath, looking down at the hair that's tightly packed and knotted, like she's ready to give up. Please don't. You just can't, I say, my voice wobbling as my eyes fill with tears. Baby girl, what's wrong? Please don't cut it. Baby girl, this side here is just knots on knots. I look in the mirror, horrified, and when she turns the chair, I drop my head and press my palms against my face. What's wrong, baby girl? When my hair got too long or too hard to comb, Mother just cut it off. She always cut it off, and I didn't know how to stop her. But I want it back, I say, tears thick in my throat. Sharing this feels like a betrayal, like I'm turning on Mother. She lived alone because of me. It's only hair, I told myself, but it always felt like something more. You ever met your real mother? Ida says, hands on my shoulders. Ever seen a picture of her? I shake my head, unsure whether real mother is a fair term. I've never known how to feel about the woman who gave me up to be raised by a mainlander. I've tried to just feel grateful to Mother for giving up everything to love me. A girl learns who she is from the woman who she sees loving her, Ida says. She learns what's good and what's lovely about herself, and the further apart she is from that woman, and the more different they are, the harder it is for her to know what to love about herself, especially when everything around her tells her she's not right. You know what I'm saying, baby girl? I nod, and Ida smiles. I remember watching my mother twist her hair. I remember her weaving her fingers through my roots. I remember what she told me when I left. You are beautiful and strong, Ida Mason, the loveliest of lovelies. You have been chosen, she said. Ida turns my chair back to face the mirror, leaning over so our faces are close together, so we're staring at our reflection. You are lovely, Elamina. Really lovely, she says. She repeats these words over and over, and I cry so hard, my whole body shakes because I desperately want to believe her. When I stop crying, she places both hands on my shoulder and squeezes gently. What do you want your hair to be like, Elamina? I look at her in the mirror and then close my eyes. I want hair that sits down on my shoulders, that I can pull up or let down. I want hair that I could twirl around my finger when I'm thinking, the way Alice Day did on the front stoop of the house next door. I want hair like Violet, hair that will make me feel like a woman, a real woman, I say. When I open my eyes, Ida is smiling, like saying all this makes me brave. Let's stop there.
Thank you so much, Jael. That was beautiful and moving. Just incredible writing. Thank you. We have up next our question and answer period for folks. So we have one sort of hangover question from the earlier talk, the guest talk with Deborah. So I'm going to start with that one. Deborah, if you'd like to chime in on this. But this could also apply to everybody else too, because you're all writers. So if you have a story that is kind of like this, then please do chime in as well. The question is, speaking of storytelling, because we were and we are, what is a most memorable reaction to a piece or review of yours that you've ever written or that you've ever published? And yeah.
It's going to sound like a humble brag.
We're okay with it. Do it. Go for it. Dive in.
I don't usually look for writers to be necessarily happy about, but Jonathan Franzen and Salman Rushdie saying that I got it better than anybody else did, and they like to see it when my name comes up on their list of people to interview them, is pretty darn cool.
Yeah, I would say you'd put that on a sticky note on your mirror. I
put
would
it
say
on a
that that's a
sticky
good one.
note, right? And that's the first thing that came to mind. People saying they've cried because things their story was finally told, right? I mean, that's happened, and that's well, that sounds like a humble brag. At the same time, I mean, that's what I set out to do, right? I want to represent what people are saying and what they're writing about, as genuinely and honestly as I can. So if I hit that mark, then that's great, because they're not, I don't think any of those interviews, leave any punches unpulled, I mean, I'll say things like it is. I won't gloss over the warts. So that feels pretty good when that happens.
All right, so that's yeah, I would say that's a pretty good one to remember, and I'm glad that your response was a positive one. I mean, I was fully expecting like death threats from writers whose work you completely misunderstood according to them, but I'm glad it was otherwise. I was going to say to our readers as well tonight, what's the most surprised that you've ever been, or has your work ever landed unexpectedly on someone? Has anyone ever surprised you with either gratitude or a blurb that blew your socks off, or anything like that?
I can share a story. I remember this one because it happened with my memoir, which was came into the world very quietly. Not a lot of people knew about it. It was like, I was a teacher at Humber at the time, and I had gotten into writing because of a few key writers who I had met and who had sort of been my okay, I've met them, I'm inspired by them, I'm going to do this. And one of those writers was Lawrence Hill. And I remember walking out of a class one time and going to my car and my friend saying, "Did you see this newspaper review?" And I was like, "No, I've been in class." So I click on the link, and it's like a very long, comprehensive review of The Stone Thrower written by Lawrence Hill. And I nearly lost my mind. And I was just like, oh my gosh, he knows who I am. He knows my whole story now. So that was I remember everything about that moment. It was such a big deal to me. Still is.
That is so wonderful. I'm gonna get high on these. Anybody else have any really great feedback stories? Marylee, I see you.
Myself there. When I went to the Humber School for Writers in 2006, I think it was, they assigned me. I had wanted this person, but I didn't have the nerve to ask, to Alistair MacLeod's group. And during the interview I had with him later in the week, he told me that he had accepted 2 of my short stories for the University of Windsor Review. And I said, well, so-and-so wrote to me. And he said, well, he just always threw the short stories on my desk, and I was the one who accepted them. And I mean, that restored my sort of confidence, and this was what I wanted to continue to do. And after that, I never expected him to recognize me when I ran into Alistair MacLeod, but he always called me by the name of the book we'd been doing when I was there, which was called Ildor. He'd sort of wave and say, "Hi, Ildor." So that was a big moment for me.
Oh, that's fantastic. Lisa, can you hit us up with any great moments too?
Well, the one that comes to mind for me is a lot. Well, it's very personal. I mean, I've had the privilege of meeting some incredible poets and writers over the years. But just after my first book came out, I got a phone call from my father. I mean, my dad was not a very literary kind of guy, right? He was like a businessman. And even though he was very creative in his own way, he was not really prone or like, into reading poetry. And I get this call from him. He's like, "So Lisa, I read your book." I'm like, "Oh, okay, Dad. So what do you think?" He was like, "You're very complex." He was like, "I didn't know you were so complex." I'm like, "Oh, geez, thanks, Dad." Okay. But he loved the book, and one of the last, actually the very last poem in that collection, Closer to Where We Began, my first book, was about my very complicated relationship with him. And it really brought us closer together, because when he came to visit me, he was living overseas at the time, and he would come back to Canada every year or so and stay with me and my partner while he was like renewing his visa. And he actually apologized for things that happened like 20 or 30 years ago. And he cried, and I cried, and I never expected in a million years that I would have that kind of moment with my dad. Through the book, like, it just never occurred to me that number one, he would engage with it on that level, and that number two, he'd be willing to actually, like, own up to things, and I would own up to things. And so I guess, yeah, I mean, I've gotten some really good praise and had some like incredibly humbling comments from different writers that I admired, but I always come back to that, and that was what I wrote in my acknowledgements for Nautilus and Bone at the very end, that, after I finished writing my first book, my dad said, "Go and write another one." So yeah, that really will always mean a lot to me.
That's amazing. This is making me very happy. All my endorphins are like snapping right now. And it's just making me think, like, we may be, or you may be, writers that other people really respect too. So let's make sure we like Jael's story, just tell other people they're lovely sometimes, because boy, it hits hard, doesn't it? And you carry that in your back pocket, or put it on your sticky note. Anyway, okay, I have another question here. Lisa, you have a lot of speculative imagery in your poetry, and Jael, your novel works with so many speculative elements as well. And also Kelly's work is solidly in this space. What drives you to explore SFF and speculative themes in your work? Do you find any power in unreality that you can use in your fiction and or poetry?
Yeah, I mean, I chose to write a dystopia after writing a memoir because I sort of felt like it was the exact opposite, right? You're rooted in rules and laws and truth, and then you're in the world of like anything goes, make it whatever you want. But I also found that, so there was a freedom there that I was looking for, but I also found it was a really helpful way to allow me to explore issues of race in ways that both relieved some of the specifics and complexities that make me kind of avoid talking about it in some ways, and also allowed me to focus in and really zero in on the things that were most interesting to me. So for example, if I were to make the characters set in the real world and they're Black, there's a whole bunch of different experiences based on if the character is Black Canadian, Black American, from the Caribbean, from Africa, from, all these different places where Black folks exist. And by making a place called the mainland, and by calling the people who were the original inhabitants Sosi people, I was able to really just pick the parts of like the system of racism that I wanted to explore. I was able to pick the parts that I wanted and leave out the complexities of geography and politics that are present in the real world, and really center in on, what does it mean to be someone who was originally born in a place and then treated poorly, and looking at colonization, and also look at people who had left that system and were now existing in a system of their own, and how they might relate to one another now that they've been separated. And so that was really, in terms of systems of racism and colonization, that's what I was really interested in. And so sci-fi dystopia allowed me to use the scars, the debts, mainland soci people in a way that freed me up as a writer. And I'll just say lastly, what was interesting about that as well is that I find in schools, for students who are reading the book, it also opens a lot of room for students to talk about it in ways that are relieved of the kind of pressure that they might feel if they were talking about white characters and Black characters, or they can talk about soci characters and mainlanders and not feel that they're like reflecting on their own personal space in the world. They can do it. There are people from, I've heard students who have a South American background or South Asian background who can also relate to what's happening in the story without feeling that it was just specifically for Black folks or white folks, but really is a more open conversation about colonization that allows them entry into. And I really have enjoyed watching students talk about it in a way that's really quite powerful. And I think sci-fi is just the place to do that. It's just awesome that way.
That's amazing. So you're building more than one world there. You're building a world in the book, and you're building worlds for people. Yeah, for real people. That's amazing. Lisa, so to get back to this, so what drives you to explore the speculative in your poetry?
Well, it's such an interesting question, and so interesting also to hear Jael's answer to that, because my book also really, I think, concerns itself with people of marginalized identities. And the story of Anna Margolin is the story of a woman who dealt with the misogyny and anti-Semitism that she faced not only within the broader society, but also within the literary circles that she moved in. And when I was writing in her voice, it was really important for me to stay true, if not to the literal historical facts of her life, then to what I felt were like the emotional truths that she lived in her reality. A lot of the speakers in her poems were actually possibly gender fluid or queer. And queerness is actually, I think, at the heart of my collection in a certain way that I wasn't quite conscious of when writing it, but looking back on it and reflecting on it, I feel like it's an unmistakable part of it. And I think that surrealism and speculative magic realism, or domestic fabulism, are ways of getting into another person's perspective, of getting into another person's shoes, and creating kind of a landscape, kind of an emotional landscape, or building a world that may take elements of fantasy at times, because that seems like almost like a truer or more appropriate way of getting to the heart of the matter. I mean, I grew up with reading, well, my mom used to read me and my sister a lot of Greek mythology, Norse folk tales, as well as all the fairy tales. There was like the red fairy tale book, the blue one. There were like these Victorian, like Brothers Grimm stories, and Hans Christian Andersen. And so that's kind of always been part of my cosmology. That's always been sort of like my way of approaching things. But I just really leaned into it with this book in a way that I didn't with my first. Like, there were seeds of it there, but as I was trying to figure out how do I want to tell Anna Margolin's story, it just felt like this was the best way to do it.
Very cool. Thank you. Mary Lou, by contrast, your character walks around outside actually trying to mine that real world for characters and to try and get fodder to continue the work of writing. How much of that is real world mined from you?
Oh, that's the question I always get asked. I tried to answer it in the fiction, didn't I? Where I I mean, it obviously it comes from my mind, but I twist things to fit the story. And yeah, I'm not going to say it was me. Although I am an old woman now, and I was trying to write from that perspective, and to create. I was interested in listening to the answers on speculative fiction and to hear the readings, because I haven't ever thought of writing in that genre. But when I listen, I'm fascinated, and I want readers. I lie all the time about whether characters are real or not. That's what you have to do, because there's so much amalgams.
That's fantastic. Okay, if we have any more YouTube questions, keep them coming. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask you all to make recommendations for our audience for books that we should look out for. Think about a book you've read maybe in the last year or so that you'd like to recommend for our audience. Something that just really stood out for you, something that kind of you can't get out of your head, or the characters have stayed with you. Marylee?
Am I? Yeah, I am. One by one of your last readers, actually. I had read it before I heard her, which was Michelle Good's Five Little Indians.
Mm-hmm.
I've been reading a number of Indigenous books recently, but that one really was just really so powerful. And I have handed it on to other people and recommended it already quite often. Yeah. Go ahead.
I can go next. So, oh, this is such a hard question because there's so many books that I'd love to just plug. But one of them I'm just going to hold up here. I Am the Big Heart by Sarah Venart, which is up for Quebec Writers Federation Poetry Award. And I just love her diction. I love her playfulness. I love the mixture of again, sort of like the surreal and very real, the way that she writes about motherhood, the way that she writes about caring for an aging and dying parent. There's just so much beauty and honesty and courage in this book. So yeah, this was really awesome.
That's Sarah Venart?
Yeah, Venart, Venart.
Oh, Venart.
Yeah. Published by Brick Books.
I don't know what to say. I feel like this question is like slightly traumatic when it comes out, because I think of all the people who like need this moment as though this is like the defining moment, as though it's like the Giller. Omar won the Giller, so I don't have to mention that one. That's good. He's fine. And that was a very good book. So I'm going to mention, okay, so I want to also say Jordan Tannehill's The Listeners is an amazing read. And it's also an amazing audiobook. So if you like audiobooks, it's a really good one to listen to on walks. It's very like single person narrative, very clear storyline. You won't get lost. You can turn it on and off 2 days apart, 3 days, a week later, and you'll still know where you are. Loved it. The other one, because I'm going to cheat. I never do one. Sorry, it never happens. The other one I'm going to do is a nonfiction. It's Big by Christina Myers. And the reason it's about life in plus size bodies. And this book we discussed at Fold in May, and I have not stopped thinking about it. I've not stopped changing as a result of it. And I think we all need to reevaluate the way we look at bodies, big bodies, fat bodies. We all need to rethink the way we look at our own bodies.
Hallelujah. From my fat ass. Thank you. I cannot wait to read that.
Can I also say, I'm going to totally cheat. There's also this book that's about fearing the Black body, which is the history of like Black bodies and fatness. And I think it's also really important to understand like how Black bodies and fatness have been discussed. So I've been reading these two together. Sorry, I did 3 books, totally cheated.
Thank you.
It's the racial origins
You
of fat.
failed cheated. Can I get another one in there?
Sorry, who's the author, Jael, or is it a collection?
This one is Sabrina Strings. It's a US author, The Racial Origins of Fat Phobia. Go, Lisa. Go, just slide it. Don't ask.
All right, I'm gonna do it. So I just started reading this incredible novel called The Man Who Saw Everything by Deborah Levy. And it's exactly what I needed to read at this moment. The prose is just exquisite. It's just so clean. There's just so many layers and so much depth to it. Just kind of blowing my mind, transporting me to some pretty awesome places, from London in the 80s to East Germany during the time of communism. And yeah, so really, really great read. Thanks to my friend Stuart Ross for recommending it to me. Yeah, so that's my other cheat plug, which is, I guess.
Okay. Is it cheating if I ask Deborah? I mean, I know
No,
this is your
you know
job.
what, I've
Okay.
got to.
Okay,
You
let's
know,
have 'em.
I
Bring 'em.
shouldn't be showing. You know, they're all favorites, right? So, two that I read recently though, and it's the reason I'm picking these two is because the preciseness of the writing and the clarity of the writing, in contrast to the ideas that they impart, is amazing. They're economical. The prose is economical. The words are precise, and the ideas are so big. And so the first one is Casey Plett's new book.
Yeah.
Jesus Murphy. A Dream of a Woman, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's a short story. She's gone back to short stories from her novel Little Fish, and they're just so beautiful. And you know, they center trans lives, but and they're humanistic though. You know, we can all relate, and that's what is so powerful, I think, about her writing, is that it's expansive and inclusive, and it also teaches us things, and it does it with such clarity and such beautiful writing on a sentence level, and it's just wonderful. The other one is Disorientation by Ian Williams, his essays, for kind of the same reason. You know, he centers you know, his life as a Black man. It's called Being Black in the World, and you know, it teaches us things. It's humanistic, and you know, we learn from these books. We learn how to be together from these books, and I think that's what's really important about them. And the writing is beautiful. They're both such powerhouses in terms of their ideas and their writing. So yeah, those two.
Wonderful. Thank you for all of these excellent recommendations. And it's not cheating to add another one. These are books we're talking about, people. These are wonderful things that we should share with everyone. So I am so grateful that you have all been with us tonight. Thank you so much. It's been such a wonderful, wonderful evening with such great words. And our next Brockton is on January 12th. Please come and join us. We'll start off the year with readings by Becky Blake, Jane Woods, Holly Godry, and Jessica Westhead, with Nadia Hone as our guest speaker, talking about children's books. And I want to thank you, Brockton readers, listeners, and supporters. We will see you next year.